Great, thanks for the introduction. I'm going to present some of the results on our systematic review on downstream passage, entrainment, and impingement. And I just wanted, before I begin, just say that this is a very collaborative project and benefited from the advice and efforts of several academics and professionals as well, many of them listed here on the slide. Basically getting into the systematic review, it follows a very regimented process, and I won't go too much into the details of the process. It's graphically represented there on the left, but the process itself and the actual systematic review, the results, are both published in open access journal Environmental Evidence. So I encourage you to consult those for more detailed accounts of the methodology and some of the results that I won't go over. So resulting from the question formulation process, we landed on a primary research question being, what are the consequences of fish entrainment and impingement associated with hydroelectric dams on freshwater fish in temperate regions? And stemming from that, we were also interested in looking at the extent of effects modifiers, so factors such as the site type, the intervention type, and its influence on fish injury and mortality from entrainment and impingement. So for the inclusion criteria for the systematic review, we used a PICO, so population intervention comparator outcome framework, and the population in this case, as you've probably figured out by now, is a temperate freshwater fish, and you can see we focused on fish in the globe figure depicted there, the highlighted areas in pink. The interventions were the various hydropower infrastructure at a site, and you can see examples of that on the drawing of a dam there below on the figure. The comparators here were no intervention or modification of the intervention, and most commonly in our review it was a downstream release of fish in a controlled release, basically downstream of the infrastructure piece that they were testing that was of interest to them. And the outcomes were injury, so bruising, scale loss, and that sort of thing, and immediate and delayed mortality. And we define immediate mortality as mortality occurring within 1 hour, and delayed as greater than or equal to 1 hour. There's quite a bit going on here. In this slide, this is from the screening and data extraction process, but really I'm not going to go too much into details here, but the key take-homes are that from our internet searches, we resulted in 3,121 records that we screened, and after the inclusion criteria, we were left with 87 articles, and that was 264 studies rather within those articles. And here's some descriptive statistics of the evidence base. You can see here in this figure that it encompassed quite a bit of years, different year ranges, predominantly 2000 to 2009. And of the 87 articles, 60 of these were gray literature, so government reports, consulting reports, conference proceedings, that kind of thing. Whereas 27 of the 87 were commercially published, so typically peer-reviewed articles. There is a very strong taxonomic bias in the evidence base, such that you can see here, I mean, we had some pretty good representation of the different taxa, fish taxa, but it was by far driven by Pacific salmonids. And there was also a study location bias, such that most of the evidence base was composed of studies that took place in the United States, with only a handful in Canada, Europe, and next to none in the developing world. This could be largely from we only included studies that were published in English because our team was all English. So the other documents which exist, and we saw some, were screened out based on language. Now for moving into some of the quantitative synthesis evidence base, this is for the meta-analysis we conducted. Of the 87 articles we started off with, 75 were retained for the meta-analysis that had suitable data that we could use, and 222 studies and 522 data sets drove this. For our effect size metric, we used the relative risk ratio, which provides a strength of the measure of strength rather of the association between fish exposed to infrastructure associated with hydropower facilities and fish injury and mortality. And we also provided the absolute risk difference, which is fairly useful to fisheries managers. And this is a measure that provides the actual difference in the observed risk of events between an intervention and a control group. So in addressing the primary research question, for the next few slides, the implications of our review are highlighted, like the management implications are highlighted in the red box, and we present the relative risk ratio and the risk difference in parentheses. So addressing our overall question, found an estimated that overall estimated injury risk increase of 217%. Now that's accounting for, that's above and beyond the control, relative to controls, and our immediate mortality, a 235% risk over and above controls. And now moving into answering our secondary questions, so looking at the effects modifiers, you'll see this figure a few times, so I'll run through it without any data on it. But on the x-axis is the mean effect size, so the relative risk ratio, and on the y-axis is the different effects modifiers, and the sample size is indicated in parentheses. Now, the dotted line represents a line of no effect, and that in a risk ratio, it is set to 1. So anything to the right of this line is an increase in risk, and to the left is a decrease in risk. So for fish injury, we found that turbines and spillways were associated with the highest risk of fish injury, and actually a decreased risk in bypasses. And we included a category for general infrastructure, and that's where basically it referred to where we couldn't tie it to one specific infrastructure type. In immediate mortality, we found that general infrastructure and turbines produced the strongest risk increases relative to controls.
1 minute left.
Okay. And within field studies, we found that Francis turbines had a much higher immediate mortality risk than Kaplan turbines. And we did conduct a taxonomic analysis and found that there was significant increased injury and immediate mortality risk relative to controls for river herring, Pacific salmonids, and a delayed mortality risk for freshwater eels. And just to address some limitations of our evidence base, additional research is really needed on systems outside of North America, and in particular on non-salmonid or non-sport fish target species. And the original intent was to look at population level consequences, but rarely was this actually done within singular studies. Very difficult, admittedly. And with that, I look forward to some questions in the question period.